I normally start these things with a little bit of a story. And this story is a story of how I almost died once, which is not always a fun way to start a talk. I was about 22, 23 years old. I was the software engineering manager at a small startup in the UK. I had a team of about 10 people. We'd just been bought by our largest client, because our largest client realized that their entire business relied on 10 idiots in a warehouse. And so they bought us. And this was not a software development company, this was a textile manufacturer. And the owner of the textile manufacturer was a dude in his 60s who had no idea about software development. And he put the software developers next to all the call center staff at the textile place, banned headphones, and required that we all go to work in suits and ties. My team did not take that well. I did not take that well. I didn't take it so well that actually, one day I was driving down the highway to work, and a truck came past me really fast. And as the truck came past me, it looked to me like my windscreen had shattered in front of me. I freaked out. I pulled over to the side of the road, and I had a full-on panic attack. Went to speak to the doctor the day afterwards, and I found out that the windscreen had not shattered. I'd had what was called an ocular migraine. Has anybody heard of those? Yeah, they're not good. Don't have one if you can avoid it. It pretty much looks like shattered glass, which was why I thought my windscreen had shattered. The stress that had built up in me for weeks and weeks up to this point had just culminated as that truck went past and just snapped me emotionally. And this was a sign for me to quit that job. But it stuck with me that I didn't even see that coming. I didn't know that I was burnt out. I didn't know that I was stressed. It just all appeared in that one moment. And so this is why this topic has been important to me for the past 15 years, is because I had that experience, and I know it's not uncommon in our industry. There's a lot of things in our industry which cause burnout and cause people to be stressed and really cause big issues. A good friend of mine recently left the industry because she just couldn't cope with the stress. She's literally stacking shelves in Coles, and she's an excellent software engineer. So this is why this topic is important to me. Sorry, not a fun story, but hopefully tells you why I'm talking about this. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is burnout, what the 9 habits are that I've identified are kind of pretty common in the industry. I'm going to hopefully give you some tips of how to work around them, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end if we've got time. If you're wondering who I am, if you've not seen me do a CocoaHeads talk before, I'm Andrew Murphy. I've been in Australia about 10 years, love travel, love getting around the world. My one regret in the world is leaving that Land Rover in the UK when I came. I loved that car so much. It was the only vehicle I've ever had. I'm not a car person, genuinely not a car person, but it's the only vehicle I've ever had that made me smile walking past it. Not even getting in it, not even driving it, just knowing I owned it made me happy. So it's my one regret moving here. But since then, I've inherited a flock of chickens and inherited a flock of humans. So I'm slowly replacing the Land Rover, but I do miss it deeply. From a professional point of view, I've been writing code since before high school. My dad taught me how to write code. I had a cool dad. He taught me to code on a ZX Spectrum, which I don't think really made it to Australia, kind of the UK's equivalent to the Commodore 64. I've also been in tech leadership a long time. Interestingly enough, Aaron, after you left Tubal's, yes. I was the director of engineering at Tubal's. So, weird connection. So yeah, I've worked in the tech industry a long time, but I've also been teaching technology leadership skills for a long time because it's important to me that we uplift the tech leadership in our industry. A lot of us go home Friday a software engineer and turn up to work on Monday a tech lead. And nothing has happened in the middle of those. And this is a problem we have in our industry. We need to support people making this transition more. Does anybody know what the average amount of time from somebody being promoted into a leadership position to being given any training at all on how to be a leader? What that average time is?
5 years.
5 years? More.
10 years.
10 years. 10 years. 10 years to fuck up somebody else's career. Think about it like that. Sorry, Pat, I put this slide. Every time I do a talk here, I see the slide at the beginning. I go, yeah, that's not me. I don't like standing up here and talking at you for 30 minutes. It's more fun for me if we have a conversation, we have a talk. So I'm going to be asking you questions. And yeah, we'll either pass the mic around. If it's a quick answer, then I'll just repeat it. We'll deal with it in a moment. Okay, so here's the first one. I've used this term burnout in the title of the talk, in my story in the beginning. When I say that word burnout, what does that mean to you? Like if we were to look at a dictionary and look under B for burnout, what would that word, the definition of that word be?
Hate your job.
You hate your job. Yeah, definitely. Anybody else?
No motivation.
No motivation. That can definitely be the case.
The salaryman's depression.
The salaryman's depression. Yeah. Well, you get paid. I just do it for free. Anybody else?
Like blank mind.
Blank mind. Yeah.
Look at a screen, it's like nothing comes to mind.
He's just staring. Yeah. Yeah. Has anybody had that? They're just like staring at their code editor or a chart or like an Excel spreadsheet in my case sometimes. And you just like, I don't know what the hell is going on here. And my brain just is, it's in neutral.
Yes, we all use Xperi.
I forgot to tell, I was going to tell a story in the beginning and I forgot. So I've done how many talks at CocoaHeads now? Like
I think this is 4.
4 or 5? It was, this is the first time I'm doing a CocoaHeads talk and I've actually written production Swift code. Woo! So I've been an imposter up until this point. Sorry. So yeah, anybody else burnout? For me, it's this sense of you just don't know what to do. Your decision-making systems have broken down. Everything feels 1,000 times harder than it should be. Everything feels 1,000 times stronger than it should be. Or, if you hit the other side of burnout, 1,000 times less strong. People tend to go to either end of the spectrum with this. They either get extremely overstimulated or they go so far beyond that it wraps around and they become numb. And that's the worst possible place, when you stop caring about it and you just go numb. So this happens so much. And I think that if you take one thing away from this talk, the one thing I want you to take away is that it's not often caused by one thing. We've all had those crunch times. We've all had the times when we've had to write a bazillion lines of code in a week to meet a deadline. But it's not that one thing that causes burnout. It's a combination of little persistent things that all build up. And 99% of those persistent things are bad management habits. They're things that managers don't even know they're doing. They're things that team leads, engineering directors, CTOs are just building into their culture without realizing the cumulative effect of them. Because every single one of them is small, but it's this consistent eroding of motivation, well-being, and performance that causes burnout. It's very rarely a one-time thing. So I'm going to go through 9 of those. We're going to talk about them. If you've got a story you want to share, please share a story. This is as much catharsis for you of getting the bad jujus out and talking about it. So please feel free to kind of share a story if you have one. So my first one, which I'm sure nobody here has ever experienced, is equating busyness with value. And what I mean by that is if they're working hard, it means they're adding value. I see this all the time. That team has got their head down writing code, they're doing good work. No, those two things are not the same. There is not a correlation between busyness and adding value. You can be really, really busy and not add value, or you can only do a little small thing and add a huge amount of value. And I think one of the bad management habits is to not realize that actually we've sometimes got to step back and understand the problem deeper. So we know this, that if we're working on something and we've only got a surface level understanding because we're jumping around all the time, then we're not adding deep value to what we're doing. We're not really understanding it, and we're not able to make these really informed decisions. One of the interesting consequences of that is you actually end up with lots of engineers only having a surface level and no one person or no small group of people having a deep understanding of it. And so you get this critical knowledge just dissipates from your team because nobody is focused on something deeply and understanding it deeply. So my tip here is try and measure the things that actually matter. Sounds obvious, not so obvious. We were talking earlier, somebody was saying that don't measure lines of code or don't measure code coverage on unit tests. Those things are not important. They're not the things that actually add value. I worked at a large Australian social media company, and after I left, they took on a new CTO, and that new CTO decided that the metric for people's performance reviews was number of PRs committed in a quarter. Not even joking. You can bet that, let's just change our linting rules a little bit. Oh, look, a bunch of PRs. So, all of these things can just be gamed and they're completely irrelevant. Find the ways in which your engineers can talk about the impact they make. So one of the things I do a lot in teams is we have, we often have like Friday showcases or end of sprint showcases. Often they talk about the features they've built. What I try and encourage people to do is to talk about the impact they made. And so, who did they build this feature for? What can Jessica do now that Jessica couldn't do last week? What can Jonathan do with our software that Jonathan couldn't do before this sprint? Let's talk about the people and the impact, not just the features we're building. And I think talking about that kind of stuff helps move the concentration away from building the feature to what's the actual value and impact we're adding. My next one, and this is especially true for if you're a leader yourself, is failing to set, respect, and model healthy boundaries. Now, we definitely kind of understand, setting and respecting boundaries, but I think if you've ever worked in a leadership role, it's so easy to go, oh yeah, but those rules don't apply to me. I can work at 7 o'clock on an evening. I can work a weekend. I tell my team, I say to my team, you finish work at 5 o'clock, and then I'm sending them Slack messages at 7 p.m. Right? The way in which you behave as a leader is implicitly the permission you're giving your team to do and the expectation you're setting. So it doesn't matter how many times you say to them, I'm working at 7, you don't have to. They're just reading it as the expectation is that I have to work at 7. So this particular one, I think if you don't model it, nobody else will do it. So set those boundaries, respect them, enforce them, remind people that they should be disconnecting from work. An interesting caveat here is some people work better outside of those standard work hours. And so this isn't necessarily everybody should start work at 9 and finish at 5, but is somebody working more hours in total than they should be doing? Is somebody's pattern changing? Is it changing because there's a deadline coming up? Just being aware of that kind of stuff. So this is one of my favorites. Promotion paradox, rewarding crisis over consistency. I have seen this happen so many times. Google is terrible with this. One of Google's promotion criterias is that you must write something that more engineers use than something else that already exists. Okay, think about it for a minute. What incentive have you just created? You just created a proliferation of little bits of software that everybody's using. You just fragmented the code base. Comes from a good place of trying to encourage, internal code usage, but ends up fragmenting everything. There's another place I've seen this, and it's a little bit insidious, is I joined a company, and I won't say which one it is, and one of the first things they said when I joined was, I don't understand why, but we have heroes in our company. We have a hero complex. There's certain people who the teams are not succeeding, and these people fly in and rescue it. And I don't understand why the team is failing, and I don't understand why these people have to feel like they have to fly in and rescue things. What's going on here? And then literally later that week in the Friday all hands, the boss brings somebody into the all hands, puts his hand around his shoulder and goes, Chris, you saved this project. This project was dying and you came in and rescued it. Good job, Chris. Even if you say to people, this is what we value, they will look at your behavior and they will look at the things you're doing and the things that you are rewarding implicitly. Being told good job for doing this thing is implicit recognition. And so a really bad management habit is doing that. Because what it says to people is we value the heroes. Again, it doesn't matter what you actually say, it matters what you do. So this is another one of those things where I think helping engineers build out impact portfolios is my tip here. So just like those impact reviews I said on a end of sprint, start documenting those. What impacts has people made? How have people improved things? These are a great way to kind of start shifting that behavior. And don't reward the heroes. If you reward the heroes, all you will get is more heroes. Kind of related to that is top performers. Has anybody got somebody in their team that just always seems to get the really tricky problems? Because they're really good at solving the tricky problems. How many of you are that person? Yeah. There's so many bad things about this. So many. That person's going to get burnout, obviously, because they've got so much extra work that they're doing. They're getting all of the really complicated work, and they might be enjoying it, but it just starts loading up again and again and again. But you also end up where the people who aren't getting that work feel left out. So it's this vicious cycle of you're overloading and burning out the people who are doing the work, underloading and disproportionately devaluing the people who aren't, and so both of them quit. You end up with burnout on one side and underrepresentation on the other. So one of the ways I like to solve this one is looking at if you use story points, which there's upsides and downsides of story points. If you are using them, you can use that to kind of look at what the average allocation is for a particular engineer and go, is this person getting disproportionately large? Or if you use t-shirt sizing, for example, are we giving this particular person really big pieces of work all the time? Or you know what, just ask people. Is there somebody in your team you think is getting all the really complicated work? Is the things that you think you should be doing? It's amazing how many times just having a conversation with people helps. Has anybody seen this kind of stuff? Yeah? Yeah, happens all the time. So especially as leaders, I've fallen foul of involving myself in every decision. The company I was telling the story about in the beginning, another reason I was burnt out for that company is when we started hiring people and increasing the team size, I fell foul of this. So I was hired as one of two software engineers in the beginning. We rebuilt the system, the platform from scratch, and then realized as we were scaling we needed more engineers. So my role became less coding, more leading. But as we took on more and more engineers, I still knew the code base intimately because I'd written every single line of it. And so when somebody joined and a piece of work came in and it was add this particular functionality to this particular part of the system, I would go, okay, cool, I know exactly what class to make that change in. I know exactly what function in that class, and I know exactly what line of code in that function in that class to make that change. And so my delivery of piece of work would be, okay, Joan, make this change, make it here, change that to that, see you later. Worked great with one engineer. By the time I had 7 engineers reporting into me, my entire job became defining to that level exactly what everybody was doing. And it got so bad that I literally, it became my entire job. And I couldn't even have a lunch break. One of my engineers built me a paper hat. And on the paper hat, it said, "Andrew is on lunch, go away." And I would wear that paper hat when I had my lunch so that nobody would bother me. At 23 years old, that was an appropriate solution to the problem. At 39 years old, that is not an appropriate solution to the problem. Because to me, the problem was I didn't have a lunch break. The problem wasn't I was causing this problem. Looking back on it with 15 years of experience, I can see that what I was doing was I was disempowering the team. I wasn't enabling them to learn and grow and experiment with the code base. So if you're stepping into leadership, this is a big problem, a really easy mistake to make. Because we feel like often as engineers we're valued on what we know. We do this in our interviews. If you look at a job spec, must have 7 years of Swift UI. It's like, cool, okay. Maybe somebody sat over there might have 7 years of Swift UI, but probably not anybody else. So we put this out there when we do job adverts, we do it in the interview process, and so we're led to this assumption that what we know is the value we add. And this becomes a problem when you step into leadership. Ooh, on call. Who's on call? Is anybody on call right now? Yeah, maybe, shrug. So if we see Vaz having a drink later, we know he's not on call.
Well, I can still be on call.
I think there's a problem in on call, which is we don't value the cognitive burden that being on call gives you. And we don't think about that as work. So it's, okay, you work for your 37 and a half hours, and then you're not working on an evening unless you get called in. But there's still cognitive load. There's still something you're thinking about in the back of your mind when you're on call. And we don't value that in any way. And so, if you're in a situation where you're doing really complex, hard work from 9 to 5, and you're on call from 5 to 9, it's incredibly draining. Because you don't get time to unwind, you don't get time to forget about work, because you've always got this little background thread in your mind that I'm on call right now, and I could, the prod could break at any moment. So one of my suggestions here, or 2 suggestions I've got, is think about that when you're planning your work. Whoever is on call, maybe give them lighter cognitive work during the time when they're on call. So if they're on call on an evening, maybe give them something that's a bit easier to do during the day, just to lighten that cognitive load. Another one is alert fatigue. Does anybody know what alert fatigue is? Does anybody want to say what it is? Bok?
It's just when you get spammed by your alert system.
Yeah. So I joined a company and I was put on their PagerDuty roster, and literally every hour was a false positive. You can bet after the first day, I wasn't even really checking it. I just wasn't. Because every single time I checked it was a false positive. So when it did go down, I didn't get to it. And I got a call from my boss who wasn't very happy. So this is alert fatigue. You become blind to the notifications. We get notification blindness. And you get the fatigue of constantly getting pinged, constantly thinking about it, constantly checking. And so, if you've got a situation where you're getting false positives all the time, it is worthwhile investing some of the time into reducing that, because it's not just about the cognitive load of being on call, it's what that carries through into your day-to-day work. So this is, again, one of those little things that feels like it's not important, but it all adds up. Because you have the cognitive load of being on call, you add in the fact you're overloaded because you're a top performer and you just get stuff shoved on you. You add in, the fact that you're working on things that are not really adding value, and these things just start exponentially increasing. Who has a fragile engineering system at work? Nobody wants to put their hand up for that one. A fragile engineering system is one of those ones where you make a change in one place and everything breaks. It's like a pane of glass. You try and chip a little bit off the edge and the whole thing just shatters. These things just add huge cognitive load to when people are thinking about it. If they have to think, how can I make this change without breaking everything, they're going to be less inclined to make changes. They're going to take longer to make changes, and people just don't want to work on your software system. People, engineers, we like to work on things that are easy to work on. This is why developer experience exists as a concept. We want to make code bases that are easy to use. And if your code base is not easy to use, you're just adding cognitive overload to everything. My suggestion here is whenever I'm looking at a company and I'm doing kind of consultancy for how they can improve their software hygiene and how they build things, a phrase I like to keep coming back to is learning-oriented systems. And what I mean by that sounds a little bit faffy, but what I mean by that is, what are you learning every time you're doing something? How are you building learning into the way you're doing things? And one of these that I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, blameless retrospectives or postmortems. Most people heard that term? What often gets missed out on those, they're amazing things. What often gets missed out of them is they're what happens when it's gone wrong. What about when it almost went wrong, but didn't? They are great learning opportunities as well, because if not for one thing, they would have been an outage. So what was that one thing? What went right? What went wrong? They tend to get just swept under the carpet. Oh, that was a near miss. Let's just forget about that and move on. No. Let's look at that deeply. Let's understand it. Let's see what went wrong, what went right, what can we learn from it. And so thinking about the things you're doing in this learning-oriented system way is a great way of doing that. One that I saw in a large 3-letter acronymed bank. Australia has a lot of large 3-letter acronym banks.
What letter does it start with?
Was they just had this culture of not thinking beyond the next quarter, the next everything that applies to all of the feeling. Yeah, you're probably right. The one I was working at though is especially bad. When you don't invest in your people, when you don't invest in thinking about it, you're treating people like they're fungible. Engineers are not fungible. What I mean by that is, if I've got a $5 note, doesn't matter if I have that $5 note or that $5 note, it's still going to buy me $5 worth of stuff. Every single engineer in this room has something different to give, has something that is unique about them, an experience that is different, something valuable. It could be a technical skill set that they've got. It could be a life experience they have. It could be a way of seeing the world. And if you don't have that way of thinking about engineering and you see every single one of them as fungible, you forget about developing those people and keeping them in your company. And so they leave. I was speaking to somebody who was running a consultancy yesterday. I think it was yesterday. I've got a 4-month-old at home. Time is a concept that I don't understand right now. It could have been 2 months ago, but it feels like yesterday. And we were talking about how he's got a bunch of attrition in his company right now. People are just quitting. And I said to him, okay, well, you know, what are you doing for team development? It's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, okay, cool. That's a good start to this conversation. Do you have any budgets for learning and development? Do you take people out for a meal every so often? Like, what are you doing to kind of do stuff? I just pay them really well. Okay, so you've got a long way to go with this conversation. To shortcut the conversation I had with him, if you only give people salary as a way to value themselves, they will only value themselves with the salary. If you give them one lever, they're going to pull that lever. If you allow people to feel that they're valued in ways that are other than just getting more money, then they're going to want to work with you. They're going to, you know, build the interesting things. I have had so many jobs where I haven't been paid market rate, but I have loved working there because the team has been great. The software we've been working on is fun. What we're building, why we're building it was great. The location was good. Everything was good about it, and the money was not as important for me. And so, here, if we're not developing our team, you end up with people who only see their value as the salary, and they will quit because somebody will always offer them more money. There's always somebody with a bigger checkbook than you.
5 minutes.
Cool. There's always somebody with a bigger checkbook than you. This is my favorite one. Meeting vampirism. Who looks at their calendar and it looks like a scene from Tetris? Yeah. There's so much research out there that shows you what this overload of moving from meeting to meeting to meeting gives us. We know this, we talk about this as an industry. We've got some really great tools nowadays where we can solve some of these problems. Say what you will about AI, it can help in these places. Transcription has got a lot better. Word error rates are now down in the kind of single digits, which is better than humans. If you've got good quality audio, automated transcription is now better than human transcription. Fact, it just is. If you have crappy audio, there's room to move there. Humans are very, very good at picking up bad audio, picking up speech in bad audio, computers not so much. But if you've got really good audio, computers smash humans out of the park. So those meetings that are basically just people talking about what they did, they don't need to be meetings. They can be status updates. If you want to just talk to the camera and record it and post it in Slack, I do that all the time. I've got a team I work with, and whenever there's something that I found fun or interesting, or I've got a status update or I want to share something, rather than getting people synchronously in Zoom, I just record a video and post it on Discord.
Just a question on that. I find that the people who join those meetings are the ones who love to give those updates.
Yeah.
The people that want the transcript tend to be the ones that don't want to give the updates. How do you balance it?
Yeah, and there's an interesting kind of follow-on from that, which is there are non-transactional benefits from those kinds of meetings as well. The kind of the human building of relationships that happen in those meetings. So I think, the ones where they're doing it purely because it's their chosen way to communicate and they're not thinking about that kind of human interaction factor, it's showing them the research. It's trying to influence them, encourage them that what they're doing actually is harming what they're trying to do. Then to the follow-on one of we are potentially losing some of this human interaction side of things. That can be outside of that. I think trying to solve both of those in one meeting is a mistake. Let's solve the status updates in one and the interhuman interactions in another, and kind of have them thought about as two separate problems. Another related one is I was working with a company on migrating from one platform to another platform, and they were migrating hundreds of microsites. And there was a meeting I would have every week where the executives would ask, how are we doing? How are we going? How many have migrated? How many is this? Blah, 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 blah. I just created a dashboard. It was a static HTML page, but it was a dashboard. And I just updated it, half an hour before the meeting. That meeting went from an hour to 5 minutes. So if we think about that thing of like, how do we get the information in asynchronous ways, we can choose to be conscious with our synchronous time, as opposed to defaulting to synchronicity. So those are my 9 habits: equating business with value, failing to set, respect, and model healthy boundaries, promotion paradox, overloading top performers, involving yourself on call, fragile engineering systems, neglecting team development, and meeting vampirism. Again, every single one of these is small, but it's the cumulative effects that really cause the problems. If I went to your company and I saw you doing one of these, I'd be like, yeah, okay, sure. If I saw you doing 5, 6, 7 of them, that's a huge problem. They all add up. Thank you very much. If you want to grab the slide deck, that's the first QR code there. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, that's the QR code that my face is under. I do a lot of live streams and talks on LinkedIn about these kinds of topics. I've had people like Scott Hanselman, Michael Lopp, charity majors, talking about all things to do engineering leadership and teams. And if you want to know more about what you can pay me dollars to do, that's what the middle link is.
And he does advertise all of the live streams and stuff on our Slack normally as well.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
In the random channel, I think, from memory.
No,
there's a leadership channel, isn't there?
I do it in team leadership, which really should be renamed Andrew, because I'm pretty much the only person that posts in there. I feel guilty every time I post. Any questions before we wrap up? Yep, one question.
Thank you for the talk. I would say the main audience is managers, but the vast majority of us here are engineers. So, for engineers, any advice how to manage up removing these habits from your managers?
So this talk is getting recorded. So send them a link to this talk. This is actually based off a blog post that I did, which you can share with them if you want as well, which is linked to on that. So I did a blog post, no internet because I didn't connect. Yeah, but that's the first thing. Like, obviously, just talking about this, engaging, discussing it is useful. Highlighting to them, often people don't see it because you're not closing the feedback loop for them. And what I mean by that is, whenever one of these things happens, you just work harder as an engineer and you just suck it all up and you just break your back to do it all, the leader's just going to go, cool, it worked, I'll do it again. So I do want to encourage you sometimes to just not always break your back. There are times when we have to work hard, when we have to really hit those deadlines, sure. But if they're every month, we need to push back. Cool. Anybody else?
Thanks, Andrew. One thing that popped in my head when I saw your 8 advices is you never mentioned the first thing that comes to mind when new managers come is lead by example.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about?
Yeah. I mentioned it briefly, but I'll go into it a little bit more. One of these things we often forget, if you're a leader, is that the way that we show ourselves is the implicit permission we give to other people. And so, if we do something, that's what we're showing is the expected behavior. And so, you know, really important, if you have a leadership position, you've got to live by these principles, because nobody else will listen to your words, they'll only listen to your actions. Do as I say, not as I do does not work with kids, and because it doesn't work with humans in general.